The bombings in Syria began back in March 2011 after a group of teenagers were arrested and tortured for painting pro-revolution slogans on a wall. This then erupted protests in the city of Dera, in which security forces opened fire, killing innocent civilians. This then led to a massive protest with hundreds of thousands of civilians in July 2011 demanding President Assad to step down from leadership.
Violence then spread throughout Syria as rebel groups formed throughout Syria battling for control of certain areas against the Syrian government. By June 2013, the UN said 90,000 people had been killed in the conflict. By August 2015, that figure had climbed to 250,000, according to activists and the UN. The majority fighting against President Assad was Sunni, who is of Shia descent.
The United Nations has concluded that all different groups involved have committed war crimes against civilians, including fighting in civilian-populated areas, murder, and torture. There have also been accusations of blocking civilians from food, water, and healthcare. The UN has also accused the Islamic State of leading a terrorist campaign throughout Syria, killing civilians that do not accept their guidelines.
In August 2013, Western nations accused the Syrian government of using chemical weapons after hundreds were killed in the suburbs of Damascus by rockets containing the chemical sarin. After the United States threatened to intervene with its military, President Assad agreed to destroy all of Syria's chemical weapons. However, in April and July 2014, Syria was once again found using the chemical chlorine in attacks against rebel groups.
Since the crisis began, more than 4.5 million people have fled from Syria. The majority of these refugees have gone to Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. Just 10% of these refugees have made it safely to Europe. There are another 6.5 million people that are displaced in Syria. The UN says we'll need $3.2 billion to help the 13.5 million people, including 6 million children, who will require some form of humanitarian assistance inside Syria in 2016. About 70% of the population is without access to adequate drinking water, 1 in 3 people are unable to meet their basic food needs, and more than 2 million children are out of school, and 4 out of 5 people live in poverty. These numbers continue to grow.
The Islamic State established a caliphate in this region and have wreaked havoc throughout Syria using brutal tactics to battle against the Syrian government and the Kurdish rebels. The U.S. has begun bombing against these terrorist groups. Russia also says they have tried bombing these terrorist groups, but reports say that their bombings have mostly killed civilians and rebel groups supported by Western nations.
The Syrian crisis has ultimately turned into a large proxy war. Russia and the Assad regime have joined forces and are spending billions on weaponry and oil transfers as Russian forces have been bombing the regime's opponents. The Syrian government has also gotten support from the Lebanon Islamic Movement Group. A number of countries have supported the Sunni opposition to the regime, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan. The U.S. has also begun training soldiers in Syria.
Most of the talks regarding Syria have remained unsuccessful. At the Geneva Convention in May 2017, talks began for peace in Syria. However, there has been little action since these talks. There was a short ceasefire between Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the Syrian government, but that ended quickly once the Syrian government began attacking again.
In December of 2018, despite opposition from other members of his cabinet, Trump announced that he would be pulling American troops out of northern Syria. Turkey's relationship with the U.S. has also been affected throughout this conflict as millions of refugees fled to Turkey as well as thousands of ISIS supporters. The U.S. and Canada have also put sanctions on arms with Turkey, which has been further detrimental to their relationship.
The Pentagon has also estimated that there are still between 14,000 to 18,000 still on the loose. Although ISIS has somewhat died down for what it once was, they still can be a threat in Syria and Iraq.
The United Nations reports that, as of January 2019, more than 5.6 million have fled the country, and over 6 million have been internally displaced. Many refugees have fled to Jordan and Lebanon, straining already weak infrastructure and limited resources. More than 3.4 million Syrians have fled to Turkey, and many have attempted to seek refuge in Europe. For the time being, U.S. forces will remain in southeast Syria. Their goal is to prevent any smuggling of weapons from Iran to Iraq. If things do not go as planned for the U.S. President Trump could possibly pull forces out.
After a long 8-year period of conflict, the Syrian war could be finally coming to an end. With over 500,000 Syrians killed in the war and another million Syrians who have fled the country searching for safety, the end of this war is nothing to rejoice. Due to the constant bombings and explosive warfare, the infrastructure in Syria has been heavily depleted. Many cities and towns have been turned into a wasteland of rubble and human bone meal. With so many citizens displaced from their homes or in extreme dismay if they were able to survive the war, a grim peace returns to Syria as everyone wonders what will happen next.
Overall, the Syrian crisis has been one of the most prevalent and controversial topics throughout the international community in recent years. Within the Syrian crisis, there have been multiple proxy wars between some of the world's most powerful countries, including Russia and the United States. There have also been proxy wars between Turkey and the Kurdish rebels and Israel and Iran. The conflict has also affected many countries throughout Europe and the Middle East, with the fleeing of Syrian refugees, including Turkey, Germany, Jordan, Lebanon, and many others. Even though most of the conflict is nearing the end, it has caused so much significant damage to the cities of Syria and to the lives of so many Syrian civilians that it is going to be nearly impossible to forget.